For this demo movie, we're going to show you some of the full features of the valve spring tester program, running a complete formal test like what's shown here. If you look up here across the top, there's 4 intake and 4 exhaust springs that we're doing. For example, like it says here, it's a big block Chevy the passenger side has. This is one head, 8 springs. So if we're going to start a new test, which we're going to show you here, it's almost always easier to start with an existing test, preferably a test that's real similar to the new test you're going to run. So let's say we're going to maybe test these same springs again after they've been in the engine for a while, made a few passes down the track. So to start a new test, you click over here on File, and then New, Start New Test. That's basically telling you that from here you can pick what specs do you want to carry over to the new test and what specs you don't. For example, you can uncheck the comments and the comments will be all blank for the new test. Or you can leave them checked and come in over here, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to modify them a little bit. Let's say we say after 3 passes down the track, that's what we want to change the comments to. So we're going to keep them checked and carry these comments over. And then here we can look in see specs for the test options. Test options give you lots of flexibility in how you want to set up your test. And how many cylinders you want to test, how many intake and exhaust valves, like on 4-valve engines, you probably have 2 intakes and 2 exhaust. Any starting number on the head, let's say like on the um, like on a Ford on the on the driver's side, you might want to start with cylinder number 5 instead of cylinder number 1. And this open height section here gives you quite a bit of flexibility. You can just enter the heights directly, like the seated height is 2.11 and the open height is 1.382, or you can say calculate what that would be from some cam specs. And this would be from tappet lift. So let's say the max tappet lift or lobe lift is 0.44, and we have 1.7 ratio. That means the gross lift is 0.748. So maybe you want to do it from that. If you know the seated height is that, and you know the gross valve lift is that, the difference is what the open height should be. You can also put in some checks over here. What do you want to flag out? Maybe you want to flag out springs that are too low in spring rate or too low in seated force or something. So you could click on here and say, yep, I want to make sure the seated force, when the valve is on the seat, I don't want any higher than 300, and I don't want it any less than 240. Maybe those are pretty wide specs, depends on your application. Another option here, and you can save all, you can fill us all in. Here's another option here. Right now we're saying the intake and exhaust are the same. So if they're the same, no sense entering double numbers just to make them match the intake. Or you can say they're different. They're not the same. And then you can fill in all these exhaust specs here with what you want the exhaust side to be. And once you get done, you could, for example, save these specs to some kind of file name. You can see and this file name is different than the test file name. Test file name behind this is Hagerty 4. But for the test specs, like just the stuff on this screen, there's a separate little library we save these things under. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually make a shortcut, take a shortcut. We've already saved some specs. This guy Hagerty, the customer, he's got his own separate specifications that he wants his springs checked for. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up a saved set of these test specs, and Hagerty, you can click over here on these things and you can get a little preview of what's happening over here. See the customer name, and Hagerty in April of 07 changed what he wanted his springs to check out as. So we're just going to open this. Do you want to save your changes I've been making to Untitled? I'm going to say no, because I've just been playing around. And here's Hagerty's new spec. So for the customer, we said Hagerty April 07, because that's when he came in with his new requirements. So this is how we want the checks that we want to make for his particular valve springs And now the intake are different than the exhaust. He's gotten a little fussier on how he wants to do things. So we're going to say back, okay. I'm going to keep these new setup specs. And now I'm going to run a new test based on all of these settings. Folder name is where you're going to save your test. And right now we're going to save it under Sanborn. Sanborn's the name of the tech running the test. That's his last name. It's Jason Sanborn is his new name or his first name. And here, let's start a new test. Okay. You can see when you start a new test, we start with a blank sheet of paper here. Everything's blank. So what we do is, like we did on the basic valve spring tester demo, we're going to show you to start a new test. You'll click on record and get your data going here, and you just cycle through the springs. Now, before I do that, I want to show you some things here in real helpful screen under settings. You got the tester calibration, which we went through in the other demo file, but preferences. Preferences are little things that help customize the program to make it work better for how you like to do things. And one real nice feature in the program is this auto advance after recording. Right here, we've got it set to yes. But what auto advance means is every time you test a spring on a full test, like over here, it's going to automatically jump to the next spring in line. Like we test exhaust number 3 with auto advance. As soon as you get done testing that exhaust number 3, if there's no problems, if the data looks good and stuff, it'll jump to intake number 4. If intake number 4 looks good, it'll jump automatically exhaust number 4. And this makes it so you can jump through the springs, test these 8 springs. Probably wouldn't take more than a minute to test all 8 with saving all the data. There's a lot of other preferences here that some of these you may not understand what they mean. Some of them you may only get told to do that by Performance Trends. If you have a particular problem and say, you know, it's doing this, I'd like the program to work like this, we'll probably tell you how to do this stuff and check this preference. Printing and graphing. Here's a nice feature in the program is you can use a logo. You can put your company logo on your printed reports and such. And that's kind of a nice feature. Let's show you how to do that. Let's say, yes, I want to use a logo, and I'm going to browse for a logo. When you're browsing, we know that our company logo is saved in a folder called My Pictures, and we're going to put the Performance Trends logo on it for now, just to show you. So here it is. You click on Open, and the file name and path is stored here. So let's save that change. And now you go up and click on Record, and you go through and cycle your springs like we talked about before. And like we said, we're not going to show you this because when we're screen recording, the data doesn't come out very good because the computer's trying to do 2 fairly fast things at the same time. Okay, we've done all our springs, all 8 springs now. Couple things I want to show you. We're looking at now intake number 1 spring. You have a couple of different options of how you can report the height data. Here we're reporting height as what we call free spring height. Like if you put up a ruler to the side of the spring. And this height here, this lower height, is when the spring is, when the valve is like fully open. That's the height of the spring because it's been compressed. And if you slide down here, this 2.110, this is the height of the spring when it is on the when the valve is fully seated, called seated height. Another way to report this is compression from seated height. How much compression you got? Now here, at 0 compression, you can see the force is very low. And as you go up in compression to the 0.728, that's how much compression or how much valve lift we got. Here's the force at 0.728 compression. So just an option. And this will also change the reports also. Some reports and graphs will be changed also based on this setting you have here. So let's make a report. A lot of people just like to compare numbers. We're going to do intake and exhaust standard report from this list, the top choice. And here we have our report for these 8 springs. And you can see here for the intake, we have a maximum and minimum of these 4 intakes, and the spread, and the 4 intake springs, and the average. And then here we have an exhaust, for the exhaust springs, a max and min, a spread, and an average. Now, if we said the intake and the exhaust specs were exactly the same in the test setup, you wouldn't get a separate intake and exhaust. It would just be what's the max and min for the springs and the spread and the average, because the specs were the seated height and the open height, for example, and stuff were exactly the same. One thing you'll notice here, we got this little less than sign here. And that's an indication that this number here is less than what the requirements were in the test setup. Remember, we set up those max and min allowable specs? Well, it's flagging out that this one here, this exhaust spring rate, is lower than what we wanted it to be. And if we come over here and look at the bind clearances, this one is less, and this one is less than we want it to be, and this one's actually greater than what we want it to be, and this one up here is also. I think it was 250 was the max clearance we allowed. Now, these clearances are they're pretty large. I mean, we're just doing demo stuff to show you how the program works, but anyway, that's how the program works for flagging out some of those ranges, maximum allowable ranges. Another type of report we can do is, it's on the bottom of this list, called force versus height details. We'll make this report. And here you can see for, this happens to be intake, you can see, for springs 1 through 4, what is the force at the different heights. And then we start down here, what is the exhaust for the exhaust? What is the force for the different heights? And again, if we had told it that the intake and exhaust were the same specs, you would see a smaller report, a more condensed report, because it would list the intake and exhaust springs more together. And just to show you how that works, let's try some here. Now, we're not being accurate because Mr. Haggerty doesn't want this to work this way, but let's say we said the intake and exhaust were the same, just to show you how it changes these reports. Everything gets refigured. We'll click on report, force versus height details, and now you can see that the intake and exhaust are listed together. Now, another real nice type of report, this is going to be real handy for you, is right above force versus height details. We have a couple of compare, and compare means compare 2 sets of springs. And the second compare is compare the standard intake and exhaust and difference. So let's select that one and make a report. Oop, somehow I didn't take it. There. So here what we're doing is comparing this test we just ran, Haggerty 5, with some other tests. You know, and for demonstration purpose, I just pulled one out. And say, where did I pull this from? This drag pro stock. Well, let's just talk about it first. Here we got the different spring rates, the different open forces for Haggerty, for intake 1, exhaust 1, and here's what we had for the drag pro stock. And you can see over here is the difference. Difference flagged out here, and also the max, the difference between the max, the min, and the spread. And you can see here, this drag pro stock had very little spread in the data. Very, very tight or similar set of springs run on this compared to what's on Haggerty after we pull it out after 3 passes. Now, if you want to know where do you pick this test for comparison, it's done here in history log. And what happens here is whatever is the first test you mark yes after the top one. The top one is the current test we're working on, Haggerty 5. And whatever test you put a yes in this column here, if you have more than one yes, it's just going to take the first one. So that's how you pick which test is going to be done for comparison. Okay, let's back out of the reports. Let's start doing some graphs. Okay, when you're back at the main screen, you're going to click on graph. And the top choice here is intake and exhaust. And here, force versus spring travel. This is a pretty easy graph to understand. We're going to make this graph. And here's a graph very similar to what you see on the main screen of force on the y-axis and spring height, in this case, across the x-axis. Now you say this is the same as the main screen. What's the advantage of this? The advantage of this is you can do a lot more things here. You could zoom in, for example, by drawing a line. You see what I did? I go up in the upper left corner of what I want area. Well, here, I'm going to blow it up again like it originally was, full view, by clicking on that. You put the pointer, the mouse pointer, away from a line. If you click on a graph line itself, you'll draw this cursor line, which is very handy. And the cursor over here shows you what the value is of each graph line at that particular point. And you can click the cursor over here, click someplace else, or you can just advance it by clicking on a little help tip message comes up over here. Click on these buttons and it will advance one increment at a time. And you can see what the value is of the different graph lines there. Now to zoom in, you got to turn the cursor off like I did there by clicking on this button. And then to zoom in, you can put the mouse pointer in the upper left corner, hold the mouse pointer and drag the mouse pointer down to the lower right corner, whatever you want to blow up, and now you've zoomed in on that area. If you don't like what you did, you can click on full view. You can use some of these other features to automatically expand it or contract it, move it, or a nice handy feature is this set scales, where you can go in and force the scales to be some particular scaling. And you can save these sets of scalings, or you can open up something previously done. Let's see what this one looks like. I'm pretty sure this one's going to be bad, but let's just show you how it works. Yeah, it's not too bad. Or we can open up a different one. Let's try this 1,400 pounds one. There. That's, hold on, set scales. Auto scaling off, yep. Okay. Oh, this is still incrementing from here, so we got to go full view first, and now we set scales. There. Now it's doing what it's supposed to do. It had some leftover button features here that were going on. Another feature you can do here is like in the reports, you can do overplots. And let's do the same thing we did in the report. Let's overlay the Drag Pro stock with this. And there it is, right there. And you say, well, this isn't really very, I want to zoom in on that some. You could draw the box like that. Or you can click on full view, where the program tries to automatically adjust the scales for the best resolution. You say, why wouldn't you want to always do that? Well, you might be used to looking at these scales we had here. You may have done all your graphs in the past with this set of scales. So you want to keep doing this. So if you got a printed graph from 2 years ago, you can kind of overlay and look at them. And this might be what you'd prefer to do. I'm going to go back to this for this demo. And let's say you want to say, well, what is all these different lines? They're hard to tell apart because they're so close together. Well, what you can do is you can go over here. See my mouse pointer on this pink cylinder number 3. I'm going to click on it. And you see how that pink line is flashing? Trying to show you that's where it is. Now see the blue line is flashing over here because I clicked on it. So that's some of the features that you can do on this graph. More features you can do are different line styles. Maybe you want to put thick lines, have the graph drawn in thick lines. I forgot, you can only do the thick lines when you are doing a different type of graph. And here, let me show you that type of graph. If you click on graph type, we have several other types of graphs we can make here. For example, maybe you want to graph out the spring rate for each of the individual springs. Now you can see we got thick lines. So here's the test we just ran, those tests that have been making some passes down the track. The spring rate at the different cylinder numbers, at cylinder 1, 2, 3, and 4. And here's what we're comparing. Again, you can see that these is a much tighter grouping. These springs are all very well matched from this Drag Pro stock. Another thing you can do is click on Format. And we got different types of graph styles we can make when we're graphing individual spring measurements, not force versus height, but individual spring measurements like spring rate, open height force, bind height clearance, things like that. We can make bar graphs. Now here you can see just a different way of presenting the same data, but now you have bar graphs. And this represents the intake spring rate, the exhaust spring rate for Hagerty, the intake spring rate and exhaust spring rate for the Drag Pro stock for comparison. Another format here, you click on Format, Line Styles, and you can do something fancy here called 3D bar graphs. So if you want to like impress your customers with a 3D graph, you can print this and they'll say, wow. And one last thing I should show you is you want to print out a report, print. You got your Windows print set up here. We're going to print it to Acrobat Distiller so that we can show you what the printout looks like on the screen. Going to print the results. And some of this stuff you won't see if you're printing directly to a paper printer. But because we're printing Acrobat to Acrobat, you see a few extra screens here. But I just want to show that you have your logo up here. This happens to be the Performance Trends logo because that's what we picked. But remember when we were in Preferences, we picked out a logo file. This could be your logo coming up on all your printouts. So this concludes the Advanced Valve Spring Tester demo.